In this section, we'll cover testing strategies. We're going to cover testing as it relates to Boomi, and we will review testing concepts, scenarios, and tools. The purpose of this testing module is to empower you to apply appropriate testing techniques in different development scenarios. We want to review proper ways to test different integration scenarios and learn techniques for specific testing steps and scenarios. Also, we want you to understand how to design for testability and the Boomi testing tools available to you. Now, why is all this important? Well, this should be pretty straightforward for us all, but integration testing is vital because low quality or unreliable integration can actively damage an organization and certainly damage the standing of the team that implements these solutions. And this applies to everyone. Quality is a non-negotiable requirement for all integrations, so effective testing is essential to quality. Let's review some definitions that we will use in this module. Test mode is when we execute a process from the build tab. An access test, or you could also call this a connection test, is used to determine the connectivity to a source or destination system. A unit test is a method by which an individual process, together with its associated control data, and also along with any specific operating procedures, are all tested to determine whether they are functionally correct. An acceptance test is a test conducted to determine if the requirements of a specification are met. So it's good to test if a process may work, but does it meet the actual requirements and goals? A performance test is used to determine a system's responsiveness and stability under a particular workload. And a regression test verifies that existing functionality that has been previously developed and tested still performs correctly. This is typically done after a code change or update. Let's review some testing strategies together. We should all be familiar with test mode at this point. It is the unit testing platform built into the Build tab, and it creates a step-by-step log which provides a great level of detail and allows you to follow a document along the path, and it's invaluable in debugging errors. You can select your atom in test mode, rerun documents, and use extensions. Now, for as helpful as test mode is, it does have some limitations. There is a limit of 100 documents or 10 megabytes of total data size. Also, you cannot test a listener process in test mode. And when working with batches, it might be difficult to trace, and you could actually split the document into so many that it exceeds your limit, in which case you will error out. But let's leave this slide on a high note. One great thing about test mode is that there is no licensing impact. So you can try out any connection without concern about purchasing additional licenses. So once you've built a process, you're ready to test it, but it's never a good idea to test with production data. Instead, you need access to some kind of test data to unit test your process. In the area of unit testing, your data can come from a few different sources. Use a sandbox environment when available. This is the best situation. So for example, Salesforce has a developer account which you can set up to copy a live setup. That way, if you goof something up, you're not doing it with real data. The message shape can be used to inject sample data as well. Typically, your process starts with a no data start shape, followed by the message shape that has data. And you've seen this in many of the training example exercises. You can use the map shape default values to generate sample data in the correct profile format. Also, consider pulling sample data from old executions in process reporting. Then stage some sample data on a local drive and inject it into your process using the disk connector. Do you have an old XML file maybe that was processed? Put it on a shared drive and start your process with a disk connector to load that document. You can also use data manipulation, search or replace to manipulate data in the middle of the process flow in order to force certain conditions. So for example, if you want to test a particular branch, you can create your data in such a way that it will be forced to travel down that branch you want to test. This is an example of a strategy we just mentioned to start a process with a no data start shape followed by a message shape that can inject data. This setup is used to quickly get data into a process without worrying about the connector. This is also the best strategy to develop a listener process because you can't test the listener connector in test mode, it has to be deployed. The message can inject any kind of data and it can be a batch document with multiple records as well. Just keep in mind that you will have to create a profile based on the structure of the data to reference those data fields. Here is an example of using default values in the map to pass in data. As you take a look over the image, you can see that many of the elements are provided with default values that can be useful for testing. And take a look at the last field, the create date. You can easily change this default value and test what happens in your process if you get different date masks. Then develop the process to validate the date field if needed. If you need real data, you can use data from a previous execution of your process, so long as you have previous executions. This would be good for regression testing, which again simply means testing to ensure the data is processed the same way it did in the previous executions. Testing connectors and connections is very important, and there are some tools built in to Boomi to assist you. First, the database connection now has a test connection button in the connection to quickly test connectivity, and this feature will be rolling out to other connections soon as well. Second is to use the Boomi import function in the connector operation, because this will test that the connection to the source is valid. Third, you can also build a simple process of a connector start shape and a stop shape and run it in test mode to evaluate your connection and the source response documents. When testing access, be sure to consider how to test connections with added security. Are there account right and permissions to consider? And remember, if you're testing behind your corporate firewall, you will need to test on a local atom. As you already know, environments are an important part of lifecycle management and process testing. Test environment runtime should mirror the production runtime when possible. Trying to keep these in sync as much as possible will make promotion much easier. Ensure that full testing in each environment and promotion by copying the process. So don't deploy to each environment, you should promote by copying. Minimize impact of the differences in your environments. Similar to the first point about runtimes, your environments should stay in sync also. Only query fields that you need, not the whole object. I know that it's easier to select all when building a query, but selecting only what you need can keep things streamlined. We encourage you to make use of extensions, manage endpoints in environments by using that extended connection. Also, take advantage of debug flags, verbose, and logging flags to build in additional logging steps into your process. When we talk about designing processes for better testing, we are referring to these techniques. Use subprocesses to modularize your integration scenario. Use a master subprocess design to manage your testing sources. So the master process has only the start shape and then would call out to multiple subprocesses. In that case, the subprocesses do all the processing, but you can test each of them individually. Further, once the subprocesses are developed, you can wrap out the master processes to create different testing scenarios. Another technique is to conditionally route to a notify shape based on an extended property. That way, if your debug flag is on, you can route to a notify shape that will write a message to the user log. Consider this also, this may be counterintuitive, but the try-catch shape can make testing harder because details of the try branch are hidden if there is a catch event. So the catch can mask errors that would be difficult for you to determine why they are caused. So when testing, it might be a good idea to disconnect the try-catch shape until unit testing is completed.